Hi, everybody. This is Nicole from Team Designlab Career Services and Partnerships. See, can everybody hear me here?
I can.
Okay, great. Well, I would like to introduce our guest today. His name is Marc Cassata. He is joining us for this webinar, just ideally for career services students. He is a global design director at Rightpoint, which is a very large company dedicated to product to digital design. And he's going to talk a little bit today about his career progression over the past 20 plus years. So we're going to spend the first like 15, 20 minutes through some guided questions. And then we're going to open the floor up to your questions. So if you want to say hello in the chat, I see lots of people doing that. That's lovely. Connect with each other. Tell us where you're from. Again, thank you for taking your Friday afternoon to spend with us here. If you do have questions, put them into the questions tab. I will be monitoring that as we go. Kind of like 15, 20 minutes in, I'll start to take a peek. We may answer some of them, we may not. And so I think right now we will dive in. Just, again, quick background about myself. I manage career services and partnerships. Some of you might know me. Hopefully you've heard from me. If you want to talk to me, by all means, please do. And I am going to open the floor to Marc now to give us a little introduction about sort of like his quick bio. Again, we could dive into details as we go. But Marc, tell us a little bit about yourself, your current role, and what Rightpoint does.
Thank you for that, Nicole. As Nicole said, my name is Marc Cassata. I am a group visual design director at Rightpoint. Rightpoint is a roughly 800-person firm under the umbrella of Genpact. So Genpact owns us. For people who don't know Genpact is an international company based out of India that basically focuses on back-end services, back-office services, data downloads, analytics, etc. We are the digital design and design experience arm. So basically when I encompass design experience, anything in the web industry, UX, UI, visual, service design, content design, business design, that is what Rightpoint does. They've been doing it for 13 years. I originally was not a member of Rightpoint. I was a member of a company called Tandem 7, which was acquired by Genpact back in 2017. And that was, they were in business for about 17 years. So we kind of rolled into Rightpoint last year. Tandem 7, again, was more of a consulting model, 2, 3 people at a certain client at a time. But again, same type of field, same type of industry, UX, UI, visual, with a big focus on research and talking and contextual inquiries. So that was what separated, I guess, Tandem 7 from a lot of other firms, is that the UX did a lot of the research up front. A lot of the work that Tandem 7 did originally was financial services work. And that is kind of what has rolled into Rightpoint right now that we're doing out of the New York geo, which is now new to Rightpoint. With that said, Rightpoint has done a lot of other business with a lot of big firms. Their biggest reveal was probably the Cadillac Lyric, where they designed the in-car experience, which is going to be the first electric Cadillac that's going to be released next year. It's a 32-inch LED touchscreen where you can get every ounce of information about the car that you're driving. Everything from the speed to how the tires are performing and surround sound. It's actually pretty intense. They've done work with Hulu, Comcast, a lot of other brands. So we're bringing in more of that financial feel. And that's what we've been doing for the past year as part of Rightpoint.
Cool. It's a lot of clients. That's a lot of business.
A lot of clients. A lot of business.
A lot of employees too. It's a very large company. But you didn't get your start in sort of like globally sized companies. So can you talk a little bit about sort of your journey now? How did you get from wherever you started to wherever you are?
I graduated from Parsons School of Design back when web was really kind of starting. So we had to learn traditional design, nuances of typography, book design, magazine design, broadcast design. I wanted to go into broadcast and film. That didn't happen. I was offered advertising or web design. I took web design, and that's the pathway that I've been on. I started with a small 10-person agency back in 2000 that has since gone online and focused more on grassroots. So they're actually kind of still in business. But for 6 years, I grew through that, designer, senior designer, art director. The thing is, since we were so small, we had to do every role possible. And that's what happened back in the aughts. I had to do project management, I had to do art direction, I had to do development, front-end development. It was par for the course. And now those roles have split, which I think is a benefit because it allows people to specialize and focus specifically on what they want to do versus things that, yeah, I'll do it because no one else is in the room who can do it at the time. That rolled into 2006 where the company went virtual for the first time, which was probably the first time I ever heard of what a virtual company is, which now is very common in this day and age of COVID and remote work. Did some work for them for about 2 years. And then 07, 08 rolled around. Economy went to shambles here in the United States. I wouldn't say I was unemployed, but I was an underemployed freelancer at the time. And it was very tough. I did a lot of work for not that much money. And unfortunately, it staggered on, and it was a tough time, to be honest. But it definitely gives you a sense of emotional and soulful strength. So I guess I wouldn't change it because that's where it pushed me where I am right now. Then flash forward to late 2010, I met the creative director at the time of Tandem 7. He gave me a freelance job at JP Morgan, which started in January of 2011. And then 4 months later, I asked to come on full time, and I did. And I've grown through Tandem 7 into Rightpoint, going from, bottom of the totem pole in design, rolling into higher level designers, and then creative director, and now group visual design director at Rightpoint. So
thank you. That was very helpful. And I think, one of the things to take away for this group here very specifically is that, I think for a lot of our career switchers, freelance isn't necessarily something that they think about as a career path because it's not really that common in other industries, or if you are a freelancer in other industries, it means very different things. Yep. But can you talk a little bit about if you're a freelancer within a larger company, maybe not, the size of your company now, but, ad agency type style, or even a freelancer within a larger design organization, you are part of the team, right? Yes. You're kind of treated as almost like a staff designer, you're just called a freelancer. But yeah, I'd love for you to talk about your views on freelance, pros and cons.
Sure. So yeah, that is correct. You're part of the team, and you're going to report to someone. You're going to maybe manage someone, depending on your level. The work you might be doing is specific to one client, and it might be specific to one particular role. So you may have a few trades under your belt. You may be a UI designer, visual designer, brand really well, UX really well, but guess what? You're only there to do visual. And that's what you're there to do. I recommend not stepping on people's toes unless they ask for your advice. But yeah, so you're part of the team. More often than not, you're probably going to be making more money than the average full-timer per hour. Then I'm not going to get into tax law. I learned that the hard way for about 10 years in the United States, but as a freelancer. But yeah, you're part of the team, and honestly, at the tail end of your engagement, could be 6 months, you could be renewed for another project. If you create a good relationship with the people in that company, they're going to call you again and again and again. We have a lot of go-to groups and freelancers that we continually call. And the only reason we don't call them again is if they've stepped on too many of my, full-time designers' toes, or they've gotten too expensive. And sometimes they do. Sometimes they price themselves out because we have a role that a client only wants to pay a certain rate. It does not make sense to bring on a freelancer to knock that project out of the park for the rate that they're going to charge us. And sometimes they're not negotiable. So that's the one situation. Those are the two situations I've encountered. Otherwise, if you're a good contractor and you're going to come in and you're going to kick ass on a project and you're going to present great work and be, present to a client in some cases, yeah, I'm going to call you again and again and again. And hopefully we can continue that relationship throughout the process of the year where you'll be a permalancer, which is the term I like to use.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, and honestly, you control your own destiny. You kind of control your own hours a little bit. Like I said, you more often than not get paid a little bit more. And when your taxes roll around, you can probably write off a little bit more. So it's not a bad thing. You just have to keep up your relationships, be kind, pardon the term, don't be a dick. And when you walk into a room, and you'll flourish in that role. But the key is that you may have to pound the pavement early on to meet some people and make some contacts.
Are there any particular, looking at our chat now, Morgan is asking, like, are there any particular skills or things that you could recommend people keep in mind if they want to go into like a freelance lifestyle?
You're going to have some level of people skills. I am an introvert at heart. I have a tough time sometimes myself. I freelanced for a little bit, and I did not like reaching out to people and blasting them and saying, hey, I'm Marc, and I could do this, this, and this. It was tough for me. If you have exceptional people skills, you can go up and you know, if you can go up on stage and tell a few jokes, for example, if you have that mentality, you'll flourish as a freelancer. Sometimes more often than not, if you have exceptional design skills and the people skills, you'll be fantastic as a contractor and freelancer. It's finding that balance. It's finding the balance of, you know, being able to converse on all levels about a particular industry or brand, your work, talk about your work, talk about the story about your work. And that takes time to hone as well. But if you have those people skills and people have told you your entire life, like you should be an actor or an actress, guess what? That'll help you in this industry too.
That's helpful. This is an interesting question, and it's one that's I would love your opinion on. So freelance rates. Freelance rates is a really interesting one. And, you know, my background is a recruiter and yours is a hiring manager and you know, former freelancer. You know, I think that there's a sliding scale for what is normal for the role. And for the most part, you know, it's interesting as the recruiting person, we don't set that, you know, we would kind of advise it, but, you know, at the end of the day, it's our finance teams that are kind of saying, here's what you got. Go out and find somebody who falls within this pool. So it is, you know, for us, a little bit out of our hands. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on, like, if you were a product designer kind of starting out here, like, how would you price yourself? How would you know when to change your price? Like, are there advantages to, you know, saying that you would do something like a monthly rate versus an hourly rate sort of thing?
I recommend the hourly rate because sometimes those projects that contractors get are bonkers. And I can tell you from the JP Morgan project that I did 10 years ago, it was bonkers. I was rolling in from, you know, holiday season of doing nothing to a January where I probably put in 210 hours, 220 hours. So yeah, do hourly if you can. Weekly, daily rates is something I see overseas in the UK, sometimes in India and in Asia as well. I recommend hourly. If you look at it from a whole kind of perspective, and Nicole, keep me honest here from how you guys do your math, but if you're getting paid $50 an hour, add 50 plus 50, and that's 100, you'll be making $100,000 a year on average. That's basically it in a nutshell. And obviously that's pre-taxes, because guess what? You're gonna have to pay your taxes no matter what. So you have to be honest with the IRS. Don't let them, you know, beat down your door 5 years from now and saying, hey, we're auditing you because you didn't pay your taxes from 5 years ago. Avoid that. Get a good accountant if you can, or know what you're doing with tax. But, you know, from the going rates of freelance, one thing you could do is, you know, the creative group puts out a yearly document on going salaries. You can find it on salary.com as well, Glassdoor. Look at what your level might be if you're in the industry for 2 years, 3 years, 4 years. Kind of hone the level, hone the location too. If you are a remote designer and you live in Wichita and you're doing work for a client in San Francisco, you're not going to get paid San Francisco rates. You're going to get paid rates for your quality of life in Wichita. That's the way it is. You know, I know New York, Los Angeles, San Francisco, and Brooklyn are the 4 most expensive cities in the country to live in right now. Atlanta's approaching that, believe it or not. And from the perspective of rates, you're going to get paid more there, but it's also going to cost more to live and work there. But if you live in Kansas City or Baton Rouge, Louisiana, or Dallas, Texas, you might get paid a little less because of where you live. I would look at the rate, the going rate, the average rate at salary.com, cut that in half, turn it to an hourly rate. So if it's $80,000, cut in half to $40 an hour, there you go. That's what you can roll in at. If you're starting over time, as your skills get better, you can up your rate once a year for quality of life, for, inflation, however you want to look at it, up at $5, up at $10, however you want to see fit. I had a freelancer who, when he worked with us, he started at 130 an hour. He was a set it and forget it type of guy. He last year and a half ago, he was up to 145. I reached out to him and asked him again. He said he's now up to 160, and that's a discounted rate for me only. He's actually charging 180. So guess what? You can earn a lot of money doing this if you stick to it. So it's a tough. There's a lot of different holes and nuances, and I'm not going to ever tell you that you can't do it. You can do it. You can do whatever you want as long as you put your mind to it. But there's some things that you're going to have to do legwork on yourself as an individual that you are not going to be told. You're not going to be told from a business perspective.
Kind of going on that track of like pros and cons of being a freelancer and having freelance be your career. We have a couple of questions here on like, how do you get clients? How do you go about that? Is there a place you look that says like freelance jobs and kind of go through there? Is it networking? I'm assuming it's some combination of that, but any advice on like what you might try and do to kind of get yourself out there in the world? I mean,
yeah, job boards, you're going to find for every 3 full-time roles, you might find a couple of contract roles. And honestly, I apologize because I have not been on a job board in a while myself. It's been over 11 years. So I don't even know what the latest and greatest is from that perspective. And I'm sure, Nicole, you have that information a lot better than I do. But LinkedIn, you'll see people posting, hey, I need support here. And the market is hot now. Whoever's rolling into their completion at Designlab, you're hitting the market at a time when talent is needed. The amount of work that has come into Rightpoint when I'm staffing on the staffing call, I laugh because it's absolutely insane, because it's very hard to move these pieces around in staff. Immediately, it's not like, it's 5 weeks down the road. No, it just came in. We need 3 more roles. Okay, what am I going to do? I don't have these people right now. So we're going to have to delay, find, look, research for that talent. So you're hitting at a right time. You have to do a little bit more legwork, but compared to when I was a freelancer, there's a lot more of those job boards, a lot more contacts that you can reach out to. You can, hit some recruiter groups. Some of them I've had some good ones. I've had some really bad ones. Obviously, Nicole, I'm sure you're very fantastic. I know your past history and how good you've done that in the past. So honestly, like a little bit of legwork will go really far. And once you make that initial contact, if you establish a good rapport with that person, let me recommend so-and-so to do the work. And then you'll create that connection. And suddenly, by the time you've been doing this for 10 years, you have a whole network. And you may never be without work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you'll have to turn down work.
You're going to have to I spoke to a freelancer this week who's like, what do you have for me? I'm like, I have something. She's like, great, it's crazy. I had to turn down 4 jobs this week.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I see, kind of following up on that, there's a lot of questions of like, what do you do to find work? How do you land clients? What are the questions? But I guess, my question for you is, as a hiring manager, what things should people not do? Like absolutely not do if they're looking for your attention, if they're looking for a job, which is fair. Yeah. What are the things that they should not say? Kind of the approaches that really put you off.
I've already cursed. I've already cursed here, right?
So there's no answers for you.
Don't walk in like your shit don't stink. Holy crap! I will end the interview in 10 minutes. I don't want to see that. I don't want to see the ego. I want to see confidence. There's a thin line between ego and confidence. Ego is falsified. It is fake. But confidence is natural. So if you have to work at that, honestly, talk in a mirror to figure out your talking points, do it. There's nothing wrong with doing that. From the perspective of what I like to see when someone walks in, if I'm interviewing them, I want them to see obviously I've seen the work. The work is good. I've seen their past work history or where they came from, and it's interesting to me, but I want to see you defend your work. I want to hear the process that you went through to get to where you got. And honestly, if I asked, hey, do you have more beyond this? Do you have the previous sketches that ended up leading to this final design? And you say no, I'm going to be concerned, because every designer worth their salt will keep everything. You're going to have hard drives. You're going to have zip disks. I'm dating myself here. Disks that you had to put into your computer on an external drive. You're going to have hard drives worth of work from years past that you can probably track down, especially if it's recent, it's the latest and greatest in your portfolio. Being conversational, don't be shy. I know it's hard. It's hard for me too, man. It really is. But honestly, if you don't have that confidence, dare I say, try to fake it. Because everyone will have a tough time. Everyone in this industry has some semblance of imposter syndrome. I do too. I fight it weekly, believe it or not. And I think the line is, if you're the smartest one in the room, you're in the wrong room. I tend to feel like I'm not the smartest one in the room weekly, and that's fine. And that's a good way to feel. That's the best thing you can do. And honestly, if you're slated for a half hour and you're talking for 45 minutes, it's a pretty good sign. That's a pretty good sign. It doesn't mean it's going to lead to a second interview. A lot of things happen. Roles disappear. Clients decide they're not going to spend that money. And honestly, treat it like, believe it or not, like you're dating. If you go on a date with someone, it goes great, and you don't hear from them for 4 weeks, maybe they're just not into you after a while. Just write it off. Write it off and keep going out there and keep getting more interviews. And go on these interviews and practice. Practice your speech, practice your explanation. You may get thrown a curveball question. There's nothing wrong with pausing silently and thinking about the answer. Silence is okay. When you're speaking and someone is talking to you and they ask you a question and you sit there go, you're continually, putting out some sort of sound from your mouth because you're thinking. If you pause and say nothing, this is my big secret. You say nothing, the person who's interviewing you is going to lean forward and they're going to they're waiting for an answer, and then you give them the answer. Yeah. So in reality, you'll find your own niche on speech. You'll find your own niche on speaking patterns. You'll find your own pathway. It's going to take some time, and that's okay. That's okay.
Yeah. I mean, I think, you mentioned it yourself, like you consider yourself an introvert. I consider myself an introvert, and I had a career in recruiting, which I don't think people would typically think
can't do that.
Are the same things. But I think, introvert and extrovert get a bad rap in a way. Yeah. You clearly can be successful
exactly
one or the other. And I think to your point, it's just, you have to practice. When I'm talking to career services students, there's a reason interviewing feels horrible. It's because you don't do it a lot. Frankly, you're going to do it right now. And it may, for a lot of the people on the call, be one of the first times they've ever interviewed for anything, let alone now their new skill set. So this idea of like, talk to a mirror, talk to your dog, talk to your mom,
seriously,
anything like that. But I guess, do you have any other advice for like, when you are interviewing a UX designer, somebody who's more on the junior end of things, are there things that you would want to see in their portfolio and things that they should leave out?
Don't think more is better. Have 2, 3, 4 knockout engagements, knockout projects. That's enough for me. Like, honestly, when I get a resume or portfolio, I kind of get excited because I'm like, oh, cool, new work. I always like to see new things. And I'll see one really great piece and maybe a couple that are not as good. And then I question them like, okay, what role were they on the first piece? Were they just a designer? Were they really spearheading the whole thing? So try to gather 2 or 3 fantastic pieces and have other people, fellow designers, instructors, mentors, take a look at them and say, hey, this is good, but you're showing too many screens. Hey, this is good, but the story you're writing about this particular flow in this UX example is too long. That's the best thing you can do. That's enough, because I'm going to spend at most 10 minutes looking at it, to be honest. And I'll know immediately if you're worth talking to. Because more often than not nowadays, we're not going into an office all dressed up in a suit and tie. Yeah, we used to do that. And then we hit the 2000s and the aughts, and everyone was wearing jeans and goatees and chains on their belts. But, now everything is remote. And really, to spend 45 minutes on a remote conversation, it's an easy way to get your foot in the door. It's not a big commitment from me. It's not a big commitment from a lot of hiring managers. So the possibilities of them actually happening, these conversations, are a little bit more possible in this day and age. Mm-hmm. So you're coming in at a really unique time in the world. Mm-hmm. Both, it's a hot market, and you could basically do it from your living room, your bed, depending on what your background is, but it can work out really well for you.
Mm-hmm. Are there any are there any questions that more of a junior designer or a newer designer should ask you in an interview? So
Sure.
That's another one that comes up all the time. It's like, what question do I ask? I don't know.
What is the typical day-to-day like? I'd like to hear people curious about what it's like to work where I work, but also what is the typical day-to-day like on an engagement, on a project, on a gig, whatever terminology you want to use. Back in the day, I guess it was, what's the average working day here in the office like? And you say, oh, people roll in at 9 and out at 5. That's a lie. No one does that in this field. You just, now in this day and age, you design, honestly, as long as you hit your deadlines, whenever you want. More often than not, if I have a design project I'm actually doing on delivery and not doing day-to-day management stuff, I'm doing it after my kids go to sleep. Kids go to sleep, they're asleep. I sit on the couch, laptop on my lap, and I try to put together whatever I can at that time before I get sleepy. So in reality, truthfully, if you ask me that, that's a good question to ask. If you kind of poke around into my past history, ask, how did you get in this job? How did you come to Rightpoint? That's okay to ask too. Not everybody's going to be as open as I am in a conversation. I like to be honest and upfront. And here's the other thing. If whoever's interviewing is cracking jokes a little bit, giggle a little bit. Don't be that person who doesn't laugh. Show a little warmth to that person, even if it's phony warmth, because you still want to create that connection. Because even if you start that warmth and start that kind of ignition in that conversation, the conversation will go a lot better.
Mm-hmm. I think that's interesting, because that's another thing we talk about, is just, it is a conversation. It's
Yes.
not an interrogation.
Yes.
You don't have to sort of sit still and not move and, kind of not react, think about how you would talk to, maybe not your best friend, but in a social situation.
Yeah.
And again, even if you are an introvert and it's not, the thing you love to do, kind of, again, you're thinking of yourself as an actor in this situation. How would somebody else do it?
Yeah, exactly.
Just go for it.
Being an actor, being an actress in the situation is a great way to look at it. Mm-hmm. Find that middle ground that works for you.
I'm gonna, pivot a little bit here to another kind of question we had talked about before this in our preparation. Can you tell us a little bit about the difference, from your perspective as a manager now, the difference between being a designer on a very small team, 10 people, you said, your company was tiny when you started at that time, and then something 800 people globally. The difference between being a designer on something like one versus another. And I know part of it you already mentioned was wearing a lot of hats, but what else would you say, to these kind of emerging designers?
Well, I mean, you go to a large company, your view, your window is going to be probably your manager and the designers you work on whatever engagements with, and whoever's in your office if you do go into an office every so often. As being part of Rightpoint now, there are, I meet a new person every week. There's a new person in my email I've never spoken to. Maybe I've heard their name in passing, but I find myself having to go through the whole spiel of who am I, either in email or over the phone or over Zoom or over Slack or Teams or whatever, application it is, every single time. It gets tiring. But with that said, there's so many resources and assets in a company of this size that more often than not, when you're on an engagement, you'll always have support, be it from your direct manager or the creative director who is overseeing that particular project. So in this case, I manage a team of 4. They report to me directly, but I would say it's only 5% of the time chance that I would be able to be on an engagement with them. So when I speak to them weekly, I have to ask them about their engagement, how it's going, among other stuff. But every so often I'll be on an engagement and I'll be directly overseeing designers that I've never met before. And in that situation, I need to get to know them a little bit and also ask the people who manage them, what can I expect? Or if there's any issues with that particular designer, if they're having a tough time, what to say to them to encourage them. So it's a larger company. You find yourself introducing yourself a lot more and acting like everyone is new in the room. In a smaller company, over time, becomes a family. You grow very trustworthy of people, but there'll be times when things are so crazy and some of the work can't done because you don't have enough resources or assets there. But do I prefer a small company? Honestly, I would say a little bit. Yeah, I do. When I mean small, I mean 20 to 80 people. When you hit 100 people or more, you're hitting the global aspect, international, national. Sometimes like I said, there are people that I've never met and never worked with, and I don't know what to expect. But with a smaller company, you tend to get familiar with people. It's like being in roommates with people after a while. You trust them and you know what to expect from them. So
there's a couple questions in the chat that are around like building positive relationships, either with clients, which again, if you're freelancer, you're trying to sort of establish a relationship, or to kind of tie it back to what we were just talking about. How are you building new team relationships as a new person? Probably a new person to design. How do you go about that, especially now? When we're all
remotely.
And theoretically might go back in person at some point to meet these people that you've only seen on screen. But any ideas or tips and tricks on like how to build these relationships? That's
a great question. I mean, one way to look at it is see your fellow designers as friends, someone that you're meeting at a party, someone that you're meeting, if you're going to college and you're meeting your roommate for the first time, or you're going to a social gathering and you're meeting someone new at a party. But you're not going through the 20 questions with them. That will happen over time. So the 5 minutes before a meeting starts to 10 minutes after a meeting ends, sometimes you'll find yourself on the phone extending conversation on something random. Eventually over time, you progress towards a meeting with someone. If there's 10 geniuses in the room and you're, someone who is not a genius, you'll eventually get smarter. For someone who has an interest in sports and you're talking to someone who does not have an interest in sports, eventually that person who does not have an interest in sports may become interested in sports. It's regression towards the mean. It's a natural thing that happens with humans in any situation. I think on a long enough timeline, you'll feel some sort of camaraderie with people. And also you'll learn how they are through their work, through what they're capable of creating. And you'll either gain some light into who they are. And honestly, the people that are mysterious, you're not going to want to create a relationship with them. You're not going to want to be friendly with them. And that's okay. You don't have to be friends with everyone. Not everyone's going to like you. That's okay. With clients pay the bills, respect them, do not speak back. You got to find that middle ground of being able to defend your work, but in a way that's proper and kind. One thing that Parsons did not teach me or teach us, my graduating class, the ability to be business savvy with clients. They taught us roll in, whatever design you create is going to be awesome. Holy sh! That was wrong. because guess what? They pay the bills. If they don't like it, they're not going to accept it. And you have to go back to the drawing board and redo it. And I've had that happen a lot. It's better to do that in a group because hive mind can create more concepts and more ideas. And that's, I guess, another benefit of a larger company. When you're a smaller company, it's one UX designer and one visual UI designer. You know, you might be tapped out of ideas. The UX designer might be tapped out of ideas. What are you going to do? You're going to scrape and bite and try to get something better out of your head, but it may be tough. But guess what? If you had a 10-person design team and designer number 9 has a great idea, then you build on that one. And that's probably one of the benefits of a larger team too.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things we do to try and sort of foster group projects here is group crits, and it's another reason why we tell all of you, you have to talk, you have to defend your work, even if it's strange, because it's not something that, again, it's not something that other professions necessarily have to do. I think students are surprised by how much presentation is involved with the actual design. You're not just doing wireframes and saying, here you go. Somebody's going to want to know why you did what you did and
exactly
questions. Yeah.
The small talk with a client also helps. Sometimes they can be scary, but you realize that they are human and you have very personal conversations with them after a while. It does help when you're in a conference room and you're presenting in person, because after you leave the conference room, sometimes you chit chat, and that's okay. And that's a good thing. When it's a Zoom, you kind of scramble off the Zoom as soon as you can. So that's tougher. So in situations like that, I guess I would say take a little bit extra time writing an email. Make it a little bit more personable. Don't make it short. Hey, here's the work. Thanks, bye. Say, hey, this is the work. This is round 1. Concept 1, I'm using red and green and Garamond, and I don't know what you think about it, but I feel like it's my favorite because whatever. Concept, go into those details. They'll appreciate that. Even if they don't read the whole damn thing, they'll still appreciate it, and they'll know that you went the extra mile. Suddenly the respect will be there because you're not curt, you're not short. Emotions and emails can definitely be misinterpreted, but if you put more time into those emails, emotions will never be misinterpreted.
Again, we're gonna, pivot a little bit just so we cover a lot of topics here. There's an interesting question in the chat from Novia on, in your experience, like what separates a junior from a mid to a senior designer? And I think it's an interesting one, and there's a lot of different answers. And like my perspective as a recruiter is, it's really going to depend on the company more so than there is a standard anywhere. And unfortunately, I think for the people watching this webinar, there is no standard. It'd be very lovely if you could absolutely say like junior, 3 years experience or under, that's it. So you're like in at Rightpoint, again, like just speaking about, maybe sort of a large agency type of thing. What's the difference?
Well, I will answer that, but before that, as a preamble, you are correct. Everything is different now because there's so many different types of companies. There's a startup every minute that appears out of nowhere with some sort of product. You have 3 designers working on that, and they roll out of there saying they're creative directors after 2 years of experience, and you're going, no, you're not. Are you kidding me? You would get eaten alive in any other company. Just because you worked at that startup doesn't mean you're that talented, you're that knowledgeable. But I guess, obviously a junior designer would be, I would say on average 1 to 3 years. Once you hit year 4, you're approaching kind of a designer or a designer level. After that, I would say 4 to 5, you're approaching senior designer or lead. And then anything above 6, you would be a lead, I guess, in my view, on average. Now, the jump from going from a lead designer to an art director requires a few things. It requires the ability to present, to defend the work, be personable, not take things to heart. It's your designs. It's not your children. It's okay if someone doesn't like them, okay? Don't get upset. Don't get depressed. Don't get defeated because something gets killed. Guess what? I sometimes still do too, and I reset and go, who cares? And in 10 years, you may not even remember this project or engagement. But when you approach that art director status, you need the ability to inspire and lead a little bit. When you approach creative director level, that becomes more business in your background. So I would say 1 to 3, 4 to 5, 5 to 6 for a lead, and then a senior level designer would be about 6 to 7. And then I would say 7, 8 associate art director, 8 above art director. I think 10 above would be creative director. I think that's a good spot to look at.
Yeah. I mean, I think generally, even if we're not talking about like agencies, 10 and above years of experience is definitely you're directing other people, you're leading pieces of work. And then I think, again, what people on this, webinar may or may not realize is a lot of times you're then responsible for business growth.
Yes.
So you have to be able to win the client and keep the client. And again, as a more junior designer, like, no, you don't have to worry about that at all. That's not your problem yet.
That's very, very true. I mean, in my old world, a few years ago, we used to have a dollar amount attached to sales. And this is the designers, and it wouldn't count against you if you didn't meet that goal, because you would be on an engagement all year. And maybe you got a re-up on a phase 2 on an engagement, and maybe that was your sale, but it wasn't enough. It's tough, but the good thing to realize is that when you get to that level, you're part of a team definitely making a sale. So it's not just on your shoulders. You're not just spearheading it on your own. And you know what? If you have 10 years experience in design and you're not a creative director, that's okay too. I've known plenty of designers who keep their head down and say, I don't want to do that. I just want to design. Same thing with developers. Developers who have said no to leadership gigs because they don't want to do that work. They just want to keep their head low, do good dev work, do good design work for a client, and sleep well when they go to bed. And that's it.
I guess following up on like the experience question, we do have a lot of career switchers here who may have some amount of experience doing something else. How would you suggest they take that and land a role that's asking for 3 years of design experience? Are there any tips and tricks that you might say, like, are there things in their past that they could emphasize, whether it is like working in teams, or maybe if you were a project manager, or I think somebody here has experience as an art director in the past, but now wants to go into UX design. Like, how do you talk about that, or what would you want them to say to you as the hiring manager?
I guess obviously that would be stated in their resume if they had prior experience, especially someone who's got prior experience as an art director. I'm curious what field that would be in. If someone did pure product design, like actual tangible products, versus an application on a mobile device, and jumping into UX, UI, there is a connection there. And if you're trying to target something a little bit more, senior than a junior level designer, I would get that pulse from their resume. I would say, you know what, they have this experience doing advertising for 5 years. Maybe they'll be a little bit more senior. When you're designing, though, at junior, standard designer, lead designer level, your craft will be as good as your tool set and how good you are in those tools. So you may have that knowledge of people skills, of working in a team, but that may get you like 1 more year on that level range. Seeing how good you are in those tools and your designs themselves is what's going to set you apart. So it may help your growth within the company after you get your foot in the door, but it depends entirely on what that prior experience is as a career switcher. I spoke to someone who he wrote B movies, horror movies, and he's gotten a lot of them filmed. And I interviewed him because he was an advertiser. He could not make that mental jump to UX in conversation. I checked him for a culture fit. He had it. I looked at his work. He had good work, but when basically in that particular cycle, I would have my 2 most senior team members at the time also talk to him, and we both came to the mutual decision that he could not make that jump. So for the role we were offering at the time, which was a senior level design role in UI and visual, he wasn't good for it. If he was just starting out, maybe, but someone at his level is not going to take that significant pay cut, according to what he was telling me, because that would have been a 3rd career reset, going from a filmmaker with B horror movies, advertising, and then UX UI. So that's a particular situation where he just shot too high from our view, but maybe he got another job elsewhere. I don't know. I didn't keep tabs on him. But in our particular situation at that time, for the financial applications we were working in and the amount of detail, he didn't have that mindset.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. So yeah, that's interesting. So what I'm hearing you say though is that linking your story to why you want to be a UX designer, you need to be able to articulate that in your resume. If someone asks you. So again, it's that like talk to a mirror, talk to your dog type thing. Just say it over and over again until it becomes more comfortable.
And I'll see that past history in your resume. It's like, oh, they were a teacher. Oh, they were a musician. Oh, any artistic connection. I'm going to be like, oh, so I'm going to actually ask you about that when I interview. If you played jazz saxophone in a band for 5 years and actually got paid for it, yeah, I'm going to ask you about that. And then I'm going to say, so why the jump? Why the change? And that's going to be the hook question of getting you to talk about why you suddenly want to be a UX designer when you were a semi-successful jazz saxophonist in that particular situation that I just made up in my head. So.
Yeah, that's fair. I guess touching on portfolios quickly, what do you like to see in a case study? Is there anything that, you know, should be there, or is there anything that if it's missing, you immediately have to say, you know, shut it down and say like, nope?
I guess, I mean, I do like to see the process and the history. So if you have variations of the original design that you want to show and how it kind of evolved from a visual perspective, I'd like to see that. It's the cutting room floor, which is an old analogy what my first creative director used. That's me personally. Other people will say something different. I do like to see a decent story on what the client need was, if it's an actual client project, or what the problem was, if it was a school assignment or a class assignment, whatever that might be, and how you solved it. A quick description on that. It doesn't have to be a novel. Less is more in type. Trust me, anytime, I'm not gonna slam Genpact here, but I've seen some decks from some people where they fit so much text on a slide for PowerPoint where I'm reading a 500-word paragraph on one slide, and that's slide 2. I didn't even get to slide 3. Less is more in text. Concise, edit it down. Have someone help you edit it who might be a talent in writing or copywriting. Less is more here. But when it comes to the work, make sure that story is fulfilled and blown out. That's what I'd like to see. Any particular disconnects, like if you got to hide the brand, if it's a particular brand that's got to be quiet about it, you can't really show it. I get that. I get it. It's scrubbed. I'm not going to ask you what brand it was in the interview. I know there's sensitivity around it. And honestly, don't steal other people's work. There was someone who we kind of gave a visual design test in my first job who was going to join the company, and we're like, oh, this looks great. And we realized it was like a really well-known website at the time. So we hired the person who half completed her HTML test because she had no time, but it was unique and conceptually unique. So he got caught. He got caught. If we hired him and we didn't catch him, he got caught.
Yeah.
So
yeah. I mean, and we talk about it all the time. Like, we encourage you to look at each other's work for inspiration and just like, what should you be doing? But don't take somebody else's work.
And it's the subconscious too. So you're going to look at something and subconsciously you're going to remember it. And then you're going to go do something 3 months down the road and you're going to pull from something that you don't know where it came from, but it's subconsciously going to pull from that piece of work that you saw. And suddenly there's going to be some similarity. And you're going to be like, uh-oh. You might catch yourself, you may not. And honestly, if you're authentic in how you designed it and you didn't say, I'm going to really steal this, then it's okay. Because everyone will grab inspiration from different spots. And, more often than not, you'll be like, hey, this looks like opening sequence to such and such movie. Oh, yeah, it does. But that's okay. Because, imitation is one of the best forms of flattery, I think. So.
Yeah. What about looking at somebody's past work in their portfolio? So we have a question here. If you were an art director, if you were a copywriter, if you were an industrial designer, if you were a filmmaker, do you want to see that if the person is applying to a UX design role? And how should they treat that?
Sure. Don't treat it as the focus. If you really feel strongly about it to show it, yeah, have it off to the side again as like a separate piece. I'll read anything that's, unique. I kind of wanted to see little snippets of the B movie guys' films because I never saw them, or a reel, right? But yeah, that's okay to show in my view. I wouldn't say no to that. It should not be the heavy focus. It should definitely have some semblance of work, be it even if it's student work. That's the front and center. But the chorus, yeah, it could be the chorus of a stage show, of a Broadway show. Sure, there's no problem with that. I kind of appreciate it. I like seeing different skill sets and talents in arts that people have. Don't roll in with your biscuit recipe. Like, that's a little pushing it.
Yeah,
that's a little pushing it. So.
Yeah, when we're talking about how do you set up your portfolio, like absolutely put in your other projects, work, so whatever that is. Yeah. And then on the About Me page too, there's the one that's too short, there's the one that's too long. And hopefully you're editing to that just right. But I think, yes, we generally do want to see like some amount of personality. It's
absolutely
creative people broadly, but just don't go overboard.
there's two types of people. There's people who write too little and people who write too much. And Nicole knows I write too much. So it's true. So definitely try to be scrupulous when you edit it yourself or have someone edit it for you.
Mm-hmm. Okay. As we kind of get down to, our last few minutes here, I've got a couple questions about inspiration. So since you have been in the industry for, so long, almost before the UX designer role existed type of thing. Yeah. How do you stay current? What inspires you? Sort of what are you excited about that is coming up next?
So about the what's coming up next, my myopic vision unfortunately comes with financial applications and looking at data visualizations that are unique, and that's more often than not what unfortunately I focused on recently. So I guess I'm not the best case for that. But with that said, I pull inspiration from anywhere but the web sometimes. I've always been a big fan of animation and how little kinetic movements within animation of any new movie or anything that's come out can inspire for the web. And honestly, like looking forward, like I always try to find, poke around the web. I always poke around the internet. I always read articles that will pop up that seem interesting. People will share articles on Slack. Follow groups on LinkedIn that may have some interest to you. Follow some brands that may have some interest to you. It doesn't matter what particular brand it is. I know everyone likes Apple, but there's so many other great brands. I follow a lot of fashion brands because of the nuances simply in typography that they do that I appreciate. Those types of interactions can always help. Listen, I'm not a big fan of social media, but I think people posting random things on Twitter, Instagram can be helpful to see some nuances of inspiration. I'm personally a big fan of Reddit because every so often someone will post a very interesting website link or whatever it might be that will go, I'm like, oh, wow, that's great. And then I'll share that with coworkers. They'll be like, oh, wow, can we use this? Can we use this idea? There's one subreddit called Data is Beautiful, which is just simply people post visualizations, which for me in financial applications is very, very helpful. Don't be myopic into simply looking for, the award-winning websites, everything else. Inspiration, any idea can come from anywhere. And it's up to you to kind of put those pieces together in your head when you create a concept.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, we have like about 5 minutes here. Do you have any like last pieces of advice for the people here, knowing that they're all here hoping to, land their first UX product design role?
Don't give up. You're going to go on interviews that are going to be awful. They're going to ask you awful. Where do you see yourself in 5 years? You're going to get those. You're going to get those. You're going to have people who want you to start the next day, which obviously they just need a pixel pusher, for lack of a better term. Just keep going out there. For every interview you go out on, you will learn more and more, and you will get more refined in your story, and you will have a stronger personality. You will be more confident. And again, don't put all your eggs in one basket. If you go out on 4 interviews and one reaches out to you and they say, hey, we want to bring you in for a second interview, but you're like, well, I want to wait for that other job to call me again. And guess what? No. Just go on that second interview. My wife is a group account director in pharmaceutical advertising. And when she was changing jobs, she had basically four offers on the table, but she was waiting on this 5th company. She decided to take one offer, which she enjoyed and she's at. And then that other company reached out to her 2 months later and said, hell, we want you to meet one more person. Your loss. If people want you, if they want to talk to you, they want you to work for them, they'll reach out to you. If they suddenly get wishy-washy, wash your hands of them and walk away and find something else. There's a lot of work out there. I'm telling you, there's a lot of work. You should be able to find a lot of opportunities. And honestly, if it's a 3-week gig to be a freelancer, do it. It may open another door later. It may give you experience. It may give you a project that you can show in your portfolio. It may only be 3 weeks, but guess what? It's something. Just do it. Just do it. Just do it. Just do it. And don't be afraid to say no. Here's the thing. If you get an opportunity that obviously feels sketchy, they're out there. Some random firm from overseas contacting you going, hey, can you do this? But you need to do this and this and this, and we're only going to pay you $10 an hour. Guess what? It's probably sketchy. Just have your radar on and be sure it feels legit. Do your research on LinkedIn if someone reaches out to you with the name. That should be your first step to make sure that they are legit. Yeah.
Due diligence, but also take all the opportunities. You never know where the might.
Yes, exactly. 100%. 100%.
Well, Marc, thank you so much for doing this today. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. It's been great.
I think that our audience found this helpful. And if anybody needs any other help with job searching, let me know. And have a great weekend, everybody.
Too. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate it. Have a good one.
Bye.
Bye-bye.